Detroit is different here at the Just Lead Conference by New Detroit. We're talking diversity, equity, and inclusion. Here with Dr. Rashawn Ray. Dr. Rashawn, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to sit down with you and have this conversation.
All right, so when we think about this in Southeast Michigan, why is it important? Why should businesses and organizations be focused on diversity?
Well, look, when we start talking about diversity, particularly racial diversity and racial equity, one thing we know about the city of Detroit is that for decades it's been plagued with structural racism that has systemically impacted families living in Detroit. Most recently, I did a report with New Detroit highlighting not only disparities in COVID-19, but also what we called COVID-19 spillovers and the way that COVID-19 was impacting families' ability to pay bills, families' ability to have their children learn in and outside of schools, and then also the ability for small businesses in Detroit that were predominantly Black and Latino-owned small businesses from getting the resources that they actually need to sustain themselves.
Okay, why do you think gaps like that still exist in this society in 2022?
Well, look, unfortunately, systemic racism, the legacy of it, as well as its current manifestations, really collide on our everyday lives. And we've never truly dealt with the way that systemic racism led to the founding of our nation and then continue to impact the outcomes that we know that exist. One big one in Detroit, like in a lot of cities around the country, deal with home values. So we know that in predominantly Black neighborhoods, that those homes are typically $48,000 less than homes in predominantly white neighborhoods. We also know that Black home ownership rates are significantly lower. And a lot of that had to do with riots that were happening in the 1960s, race riots in particular, and then also the legacy of highways in the way that they run through predominantly Black neighborhoods, and then also what happens when work disappears. We know that in Detroit, that when vehicle manufacturers started to decrease their employer base, that all of a sudden impacted significantly what was happening with Black communities. And we haven't dealt with that. And so you ride around the city of Detroit, downtown, and even some of the suburbs, and you see the legacy of that and what's happening. And we need businesses to not only realize that they need to be here and invest, we also need to help them realize that there has to be an auto-correction to help create racial equity. Equity is about making people whole. It's about giving people what they need, not just giving people the same thing. And it's clear that in Detroit that people need some very, very specific things.
Okay, so as a researcher in this field, a doctor in this field, where do the tools in that world of academia, in the world of statistics, in the world of basically giving people the facts and the data, how does that help in this fight to bring about more equity in this balance?
Well, look, I'm a sociologist. I'm a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. I'm also a professor of sociology at the University of Maryland. And one key thing there is the data and the facts. Having valid and reliable information is how we get on the same page. One of the things that's happening in America right now, and in many regards it's always been this way, but particularly now with the advent of social media, so we're exposed to so much content, but it doesn't always mean that's the actual factual content that we should be consuming. So one of the things that academics and researchers do, we conduct valid and reliable research, and we say, these are the facts, these are the outcomes, this is what it is, this is what it isn't. And what happens at that point, that allows us to get on the same page because we aren't even in the same book. Oftentimes people talk about getting on the same page. That suggests that you are in the same book. We're not even in the same book. We are having completely different conversations about the same topics. So we have to get in the same book, on the same page, and on the same line. And valid and reliable information allows us to do that. Once we do that, then typically we are coming up with a similar set of solutions. It doesn't always mean it's the same solution, and typically these problems are multifaceted, so they require a series of solutions. But we at least need to get on the same page, and once we do that, then we are having similar conversations. We are also starting at the same point. On a scale from 1 to 10, instead of starting at 1 or 2, we are actually starting at 7. And now we have a smaller gap to make up to say, let's talk about how this is going to benefit all of us collectively, benefit all of our families, all of our communities, and then we can move forward as a country and also set an example for the world to finally deal with racism.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rashawn.